Amara wasn't expecting anyone that night. The knock on the door was soft but urgent, the kind that makes your heart skip. When she opened it, there stood Tandy, mascara running down her cheeks, eyes red and swollen, a small suitcase at her feet. "Tandy." Amara's voice cracked a little. "What happened?" Tandy tried to smile, but her lip trembled. "My marriage is over. Sis, we cheated. I can't be alone right now." Without hesitation, Amara pulled her into a hug. Tandy's body shook against hers, and Amara felt a wave of pity. Whatever had happened, her sister didn't deserve this kind of pain. "You're staying here," she said firmly. "We'll figure everything out." Chuma came from the living room, concern written all over his face. "Hey, everything okay?" "Tandy's moving in for a while," Amara said softly. He nodded, already reaching for her suitcase. "Of course. Come in, Tandy." He carried the bags down the hallway, showing her the guest room. Tandy managed a small thank you, brushing her fingers over her eyes. Amara made tea, the way their mother used to when things fell apart. The three of them sat together for a while, the air heavy but calm. It almost felt normal again, like family. But later, as Chuma laughed at something on TV, Amara noticed Tandy looking at him a second too long. The way her lips curved, the faint sparkle in her eyes. It was nothing, Amara told herself. Just a tired woman finding comfort. Still, something in her stomach twisted, a quiet warning she couldn't ignore. Within a few days, the house started to feel different. At first, Amara told herself it was just an adjustment, another woman in the space, another routine to get used to. But soon, Tandy began to act a little too at home. She walked around in a silk robe that barely covered her thighs, humming softly as she moved through the kitchen. When Chuma passed behind her, she'd accidentally brush against him and giggle like it was nothing. One afternoon, Chuma was lifting boxes from the garage, his t-shirt sticking to his back with sweat. Tandy leaned against the doorway and smiled. "Wow, Chuma, I forgot how strong you are. Sis, we could never do half of that." Her voice carried that light, teasing tone Amara recognized, the one Tandy used when she wanted attention. Amara was in the living room, pretending to scroll through her phone, but her jaw tightened. She didn't want to overreact. Tandy was hurting. Maybe she was just trying to feel noticed again after being cheated on. Still, something about it didn't sit right. That night at dinner, Tandy laughed at every joke Chuma made, even the silly ones that barely deserved a smile. "You're so funny," she said between giggles, touching his arm lightly. Amara's fork froze midair. That was it. This wasn't her imagination. Later that night, when they were in bed, she finally spoke up. "I think Tandy's trying to get your attention." Chuma looked up from his phone, surprised. "What?" "No, babe. She's just being friendly. You know how she is." Amara sighed. "Friendly doesn't mean flirty, Chuma. You don't see the way she looks at you." He laughed softly, trying to brush it off. "You're reading too much into it. She's going through a lot right now. Let's just give her space to heal." Amara turned away, staring at the dark ceiling. Maybe he was right. Maybe grief made people act strange. But as she replayed the day in her mind, the robe, the compliments, the laughter, she couldn't shake the feeling that Tandy wasn't just trying to heal. Over the next few days, Chuma started avoiding eye contact with Tandy altogether. If she entered the room, he'd suddenly remember something he needed to do in another part of the house. Amara noticed it immediately. He was uncomfortable too. He just didn't want to admit it. At breakfast one morning, Tandy leaned over to pour herself some juice, her robe slipping off one shoulder. Chuma quickly stood and muttered, "I'll be outside," before walking out to the garden. Amara met Tandy's eyes across the table. There was a tiny smirk there, quick but sharp. And in that moment, Amara knew. This wasn't sisterly behavior anymore. It was a quiet game, and Tandy had just made her first move. The morning started like any other. Amara came downstairs still half asleep, hoping for coffee before facing her long day. But as she turned the corner into the kitchen, she stopped cold. There was Tandy, humming to herself, frying eggs, wearing Amara's robe. The same soft pink one Chuma had bought her for their anniversary. "Morning, sister," Tandy said casually, flipping an omelet like nothing was wrong. Amara blinked, trying to stay calm. "That's mine." Tandy glanced down, then gave a small laugh. "Oh, I must have grabbed it by mistake. Sorry, sis." But her smirk said otherwise. It wasn't the face of someone who'd made an honest mistake. It was a quiet dare. Amara forced a smile and poured her coffee, though her hands trembled slightly. "Just be careful next time," she said, voice steady but tight. "Of course," Tandy replied sweetly, turning back to the stove. The rest of the morning felt off. Chuma came in a few minutes later, kissed Amara on the cheek, and thanked Tandy for breakfast. Amara noticed how quickly Tandy's eyes lit up at the sound of his voice, like she was waiting for him to notice her. He didn't, but that didn't stop her from trying. By evening, Amara was exhausted from pretending not to see what was happening. Chuma was in the living room, fixing the Wi-Fi router that had been giving them trouble. When it finally blinked back to life, Tandy walked in with 2 mugs of coffee, one for him, one for herself. "There's my hero," she said, her voice soft and teasing. Amara, watching from the doorway, felt something inside her snap. "Tandy," she said sharply, stepping into the room. Both of them looked up. "I don't know what game you're playing, but whatever it is, stop it." Her tone was calm, but her eyes didn't waver. Tandy blinked in fake confusion. "Game? Amara, please. You're overreacting. Not everyone wants your man." But her smirk returned, small, almost invisible, but full of challenge. Chuma stood up quickly, sensing the tension. "Okay, let's all just relax," he said, setting down his coffee. He looked tired, caught in the middle of something he didn't start and didn't know how to end. Amara didn't say another word. She turned and walked away before she said something she'd regret. But inside, the anger was burning, not just at Tandy's boldness, but at the quiet disrespect it carried. That night, lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling and thought of her sister downstairs, sleeping peacefully under her roof, wearing her robe, flirting with her husband. And for the first time, Amara realized this wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about control. Tandy's game started small, quiet comments, half smiles, and soft whispers Amara wasn't supposed to hear. At first, it was things like, "Amara's been a bit stressed lately," or "She's always so busy, poor Chuma." But soon, the comments turned sharper. When Mama Lindau called to check on them, Tandy's voice would drop just enough for Amara to catch words like cold and controlling. So when Mama visited one Sunday afternoon, Amara wasn't surprised, but she was still caught off guard. "Amara," Mama said gently, after helping herself to tea, "I think you should be a little kinder to Tandy. She's fragile right now, you know? Going through so much." Amara stared at her mother, speechless. "Kinder? Mama, I've done everything for her. She's been here for weeks. I've given her space, food, everything." Mama sighed, patting her hand like she was the one overreacting. "I know, my child, but she says you've been distant. Maybe she just needs your warmth." Amara felt her chest tighten. Distant? That wasn't true. But she knew better than to argue. If she defended herself, she'd only sound defensive. That evening, the house felt heavier than usual. Chuma was in the shower, and Tandy was in her room, phone pressed to her ear. Amara walked past the hallway, planning to go upstairs, until she heard it. Tandy's voice, low and syrupy. "He's different from Sizwe. So kind, so patient." Amara froze. Then came a pause, followed by a quiet giggle, the kind that only comes when someone is flirting. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the floor. She couldn't see inside the room, but she didn't need to. The tone said everything. Amara pulled out her phone and hit record. Her hands trembled, but she held it steady near the door. Then she heard it, the line that made her blood run cold. If Amara wasn't around. The sentence hung there, unfinished but full of meaning. A soft laugh followed, and Amara's stomach turned. She stepped back, heart pounding in her ears. The woman she had hugged at the door, the sister she had sheltered and comforted, was sitting just a few feet away, talking about her husband like he was some kind of prize to steal. Amara didn't confront her that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, listening to the recording over and over until the sound of Tandy's laughter felt like a blade twisting in her chest. This wasn't insecurity anymore. It wasn't her imagination. Tandy wasn't just crossing lines. She was rewriting them, one whisper at a time. Amara didn't say a word after hearing that phone call. She decided to stay quiet and watch instead. If Tandy was really crossing the line, she wanted to be sure before making any move. So she started paying attention to everything. It didn't take long for the small things to appear. One afternoon, when she got into Chuma's car, she caught the scent of a floral perfume she didn't own. It was strong, sweet, and unfamiliar. Chuma wasn't the type to notice scents, so he didn't even mention it. But Amara knew that wasn't hers. Then, a few days later, she noticed lipstick stains on one of Chuma's favorite mugs. The deep red wasn't her shade. She stared at it for a long time before washing it off, her hands shaking. She didn't want to accuse anyone without proof, but her gut was screaming. Every evening, Tandy seemed to find new reasons to linger around Chuma, asking for help with her phone, her laptop, the Wi-Fi. Always something. Chuma remained polite but distant, and Amara could see how stiff he got whenever Tandy was too close. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Amara couldn't sleep. Something in her told her to check the baby monitor camera they still used when their toddler niece came over. It faced the living room, the perfect angle to catch late-night movements. She opened the app on her phone, expecting to see an empty room. But her heart dropped. The timestamp showed midnight, and there was Tandy, walking into the living room in her silk robe, hair loose around her shoulders. Chuma was there too, sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked tired, probably couldn't sleep either. Tandy sat down beside him, way too close. Even through the grainy footage, Amara could see her leaning in, whispering something. For a moment, Chuma didn't move. Then he sat up straight, clearly uncomfortable. His body language said everything. He shook his head, stood, and walked upstairs. Tandy stayed sitting there, her expression dark and unreadable, before turning off the lights. Amara's hands covered her mouth as she watched. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She rewound the footage, just to be sure she wasn't seeing things. But no, it was clear. Tandy wasn't just being too friendly. She wasn't lost or broken or healing from heartbreak. She was making her move, right under Amara's roof. Amara closed the app and sat in silence, her phone still glowing in her lap. The proof was right there, undeniable and cruel. Her stepsister hadn't just crossed the line. She was trying to take her place. The next morning, Amara woke up with a clear decision. No more guessing, no more pretending everything was fine. The proof was right there. The recording, the perfume, the lipstick, the video. She had been patient long enough. She waited until everyone was awake. Mama Lindiwe had come by early, saying she wanted to check on her girls. Chuma was sitting quietly at the dining table, sipping his coffee. Tandy joined them a few minutes later, acting as if nothing had happened. She smiled sweetly at Chuma and asked, "Want me to make you another cup?" Amara's chest tightened. That was it. She picked up her phone, opened the voice recording, and hit play. Tandy's own voice filled the room. He's different from Sizwe. So kind. So patient. If Amara wasn't around, the air turned thick and silent. Everyone froze. The sound of Tandy's nervous laugh on the recording made it even worse. Tandy's face drained of color. What is that?" she stammered, her voice shaking. Amara looked straight at her. "That's you. The night you sat in your room whispering about my husband like he was yours." Her tone was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "You came into my house for comfort and tried to destroy it instead." Tandy's hands trembled. "It's not like that. You're twisting things. I was just talking, I didn't mean." Chuma cut her off. His voice was quiet but firm. "It's exactly like that." He stood up, setting his cup down with a heavy clink. "Pack your things, Tandy. You're leaving today." For a moment, Tandy just stared at him, shocked, maybe hoping he'd soften like before. But he didn't flinch. His expression said everything. Mama Lindiwe stood up quickly. "Chuma, please, maybe we can talk." "No, Mama," Amara said softly, turning to her. "You've seen the proof. You heard her yourself." Mama Lindiwe looked torn. Her lips trembled as she looked between her daughters. For once, she had no defense for Tandy. The shame in her eyes said it all. Tandy's shoulders slumped. "You all think I'm the villain here, huh?" she said bitterly. "Fine." She wiped her tears and gave a shaky laugh. "At least I know the truth. None of you ever really cared about me." No one answered. Chuma walked out of the room, his jaw tight, while Amara stayed still, holding her phone like a shield. The silence that followed was loud. Tandy stood there for a moment longer, eyes glassy, before storming off to her room. Amara finally exhaled, her hands trembling. She didn't feel triumphant, just empty. The betrayal had already done its damage. But as she looked toward Chuma, who met her gaze with quiet apology, she knew one thing for sure. The truth was finally out, and her home would never feel the same again. Tandy's suitcase hit the floor with a loud thud. Her hands were shaking, eyes red and swollen from crying. "You always thought you were better than me, Amara," she shouted, voice cracking in the middle of the sentence. "Ever since we were kids, it's always been about you. The perfect one, the lucky one, the one everyone listens to." Amara stood quietly by the doorway, her heart pounding but her face calm. "No, Tandy," she said softly. "I just respected boundaries." Tandy froze for a second, her lip trembling, but instead of responding, she turned away and started throwing clothes into her bag. The sound of hangers clattering and drawers slamming echoed through the room. Mama Lindiwe tried to step in, but Tandy brushed her off. "Don't, Mama. I don't need anyone's pity," she snapped. Then she looked at Amara one last time. "You can keep your perfect little life. I hope it keeps you warm at night." Amara didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. When Tandy finally dragged her suitcase to the door, she paused, just for a moment, as if waiting for someone to stop her. But no one did. Then she yanked the door open and stormed out, slamming it behind her so hard the frame rattled. The silence afterward was deafening. For a few seconds, all Amara could hear was her own breathing. The house, which had felt heavy and tense for weeks, suddenly felt lighter, painfully quiet, but peaceful. She leaned against the wall, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. It wasn't relief exactly, more like release. The kind that comes after holding your breath for too long. Chuma came up behind her and gently pulled her into his arm. "You did the right thing," he whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you earlier." Amara nodded against his chest, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know. It's just she's my sister." "I know," he said softly. "But some people only learn the hard way." They stood there for a while, not saying anything, just breathing together in the quiet house. The smell of coffee still lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the faint trace of Tandy's perfume, a reminder of everything that had happened. Later, when the house settled and the sun started to set, Amara walked into the guest room. The bed was unmade, the air still carrying the tension of all the unspoken words. She sat on the edge of it, tracing her fingers along the blanket, and let the tears finally come. She wasn't crying for Chuma or even for herself. She was crying for the sister she had lost long before that morning. Because deep down, Amara knew this wasn't a wound her husband could heal. It was the kind that only time and distance could touch. Weeks passed, and slowly, life began to feel normal again. The house was quiet, the air lighter, and Amara could finally breathe without feeling watched. She threw herself into work, waking up early, cooking breakfast with Chuma, and enjoying small, peaceful moments that used to feel impossible. But peace never stays untouched for long. It started with whispers. A friend from church mentioned that Tandy had been talking, telling people that Amara had kicked her out and made her homeless after her marriage ended. The story spread fast, twisting with every retelling. Suddenly, Amara was the cold sister, the one who didn't help family in need. When she first heard it, she just sat quietly, staring at her phone. She didn't even have the energy to defend herself. Let people believe what they want, she told Chuma. I know the truth. Still, it stung. Betrayal from a sister was one thing, but to be painted as the villain afterward, that hit different. One Friday afternoon, while Amara was finishing up a project, she got another message from a mutual friend. I heard Tandy lost her job, it read. For a moment, Amara froze. Her first instinct wasn't anger, it was guilt. Despite everything, she still cared. Memories of them as girls flashed in her mind, sharing clothes, laughing about silly things, dreaming about the future. For a second, she even considered calling her. But then she remembered that night, Tandy in her robe, whispering in the dark, trying to take what wasn't hers. The guilt faded just enough for clarity to return. Some pain doesn't deserve a second chance. That evening, Mama Lindau called. Her voice was tired but gentle. Amara, your sister wants to apologize, she said softly. She's been struggling. She says she's ready to make things right. Amara was quiet for a long time. She looked out the window, watching the sky turn orange. Tell her I forgive her, she said finally, but I can't let her back into my life. There was a pause on the other end. You're sure? Mama asked. Yes, Amara said, her voice steady now. I've made peace with what happened, but some doors, once closed, should stay that way. After the call, Amara sat for a while, letting the stillness wrap around her. She wasn't angry anymore, just done. She realized forgiveness didn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it simply meant choosing peace over chaos and freedom over guilt. When Chuma came home, she met him at the door with a small smile. Everything okay? He asked. Yeah, she said quietly. It finally is. And for the first time in months, she truly meant it. Months later, life had finally settled into something that felt peaceful again. The storm that had once torn through their home was gone, leaving behind quiet mornings, laughter that sounded real, and love that felt steady. When Chuma suggested a small trip to Durban, Amara didn't think much of it, just a weekend getaway to breathe by the ocean. On their second evening there, as the sun melted into the horizon, Chuma took her hand and led her down to the beach. The air smelled of salt and coconut oil from the nearby stalls, and the waves rolled in with a soft rhythm that felt like peace itself. Let's do something, he said, smiling. Something just for us. Before she could ask what he meant, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, engraved with small words that caught the fading light, for believing in yourself. Amara looked up at him, her eyes already glistening. Chuma, what is this? He took her hands gently. I didn't realize how strong you were until I saw how calm you stayed through everything, he said quietly. Even when I doubted you, you never lost your peace. You believed in yourself, in us, when it would have been easier to break. For a moment, Amara couldn't speak. The sound of the waves filled the silence between them, wrapping around them like a soft song. She smiled finally and said, It's easy to stay calm when you know your worth. He slipped the necklace around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin. Then he whispered, Let's renew our vows. No guests. No pressure. Just us. So they did. Standing barefoot in the sand, with only the ocean and sky as witnesses, they promised each other what truly mattered: patience, honesty, and peace. No rings, no grand speeches. Just two people choosing to begin again. When Chuma said, I still choose you, Amara's heart swelled. This time, the words felt deeper. They weren't about romance or perfection. They were about survival, trust, and growth. As the sun dipped below the water, Amara rested her head on his shoulder, watching the colors fade into night. The pain she'd carried for so long had softened, turning into something purer, self-respect. She finally understood that strength didn't always mean fighting back or proving a point. Sometimes it meant standing still, knowing your truth, and letting life move forward without bitterness. When they walked back to their small beach cottage, fingers intertwined, Amara smiled to herself. The storm had tested her, but it hadn't broken her. It had reminded her who she really was, and she had come out shining, quietly and completely. Almost a year later, on a quiet Saturday morning, Amara found an envelope in her mailbox with handwriting she instantly recognized. Her heart skipped. It was from Tandy. She stood there for a moment, the ocean breeze brushing her face, before carefully opening. Inside was a simple letter. "I'm in therapy now," it began. "I realized I envied the peace you had, not your husband. I wanted what you carried inside, that calm, that confidence. I'm sorry for everything. I'm learning to be better." Amara read the words twice, her eyes softening with every line. A single tear slipped down her cheek, not from pain this time, but from release. She folded the letter neatly and tucked it back into the envelope. She didn't plan to reply, not because she was angry, but because she finally understood that some goodbyes don't need closure. Acceptance was enough. Later that evening, she walked along the beach with Chuma, the waves curling around their feet. He looked at her and smiled, asking, "Everything okay?" She nodded, glancing at the horizon. "Yeah, everything's finally okay." In her heart, a quiet truth formed, one she'd learned the hard way. Some people don't want what you have, they just want to ruin what they lost. But when you choose peace over revenge, you win without saying a word. She smiled softly, reaching for Chuma's hand as the sun dipped into the water. The wind caught her hair, and for the first time in a long time, she felt completely free. Sometimes the real glow-up isn't about proving a point, it's about staying graceful after the storm. And Amara, standing by the ocean, knew she finally had.